$23.4 billion. That is the Congressional Budget Office estimate for one warship, one hull, not a strike group, not a program year, a single ship. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, the most complicated machine the United States has ever put in the water, cost about $13.3 billion. Future Ford-class carriers are estimated around $22 billion each, which means the ship being designed right now would be the most expensive surface vessel in American naval history. And it is not a carrier, it is a battleship. The first the United States has planned since the Second World War. 880 feet of hull, 35,000 tons. A nuclear reactor, 128 missile cells. And here's the strange thing about it. You can already walk through almost every part of this ship, not on a drawing board, on real steel, in real harbors, on vessels the Navy operates or preserves today, because nothing in this design is invented from nothing. Every compartment is borrowed, scaled, or corrected from a ship that already exists. So this is a tour of a warship that has not been built, assembled out of the ships that built it. Start where the tour has to start, in Los Angeles, in Norfolk, in Honolulu, and Camden, where the last American battleships sit against museum piers. The USS Iowa, the USS Missouri, ships you can board today and walk the teak decks of. Stand at the rail of one and look down the length of it, because the new ship is almost exactly this size. The planning parameters put the Defiant between 840 and 880 feet long, with a beam of 105 to 115 feet. An Iowa is 887 feet long, with a beam of 108. Same footprint. Effectively the same ship, seen from a helicopter. Now go below on that museum ship, into the armored citadel, and the resemblance collapses. Run your hand along the belt armor and you are touching more than a foot of steel plate. Look up at the barbette of Turret 2 and you are looking at a rotating structure that weighs 1,700 tons on its own. An Iowa displaced 57,000 tons fully loaded. The new ship displaces 35,000. 22,000 tons are missing, and this is where they went. All of it. The belt, the citadel, the turrets, the magazines that fed them. Every pound of that existed to survive being hit by another battleship's shells. And none of it is coming back. So the word battleship on the new ship means the volume of firepower. It does not mean the plating, which leaves a question the design has to answer somewhere and takes a long time to answer. Strip the armor off a ship this size. And what keeps it alive? Leave the museum pier and go to Newport News, Virginia, where the answer to the propulsion question is already floating. The Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan, released in May 2026, confirmed publicly for the first time that the new battleship is nuclear-powered. In the Navy's own designation scheme, it becomes BBGN, Guided Missile Battleship, Nuclear. To understand what that means, look at the carriers. A Nimitz or a Ford does not refuel. It steams for decades on a reactor core. The trade-off is visible in the yard itself. Nuclear construction happens in a very small number of certified American shipyards, using welders and reactor technicians who take years to qualify and who are already fully committed to the submarine programs. That is a large share of the $23 billion right there before a single missile is loaded. What the Navy buys for it is endurance. Sustained speed above 30 knots indefinitely without ever taking on fuel. Watch a conventionally powered destroyer come alongside an oiler in the open ocean, and you are watching a constraint. That ship's operating pattern is written by its fuel state. The Defiant would not have that constraint. It could hold 30 knots alongside a carrier or sit forward on station for as long as the food and the crew hold out. The Navy's stated role, quoted from the shipbuilding plan, is to deliver high-volume, long-range offensive fires and to serve as a robust, survivable forward command and control platform. And the plan is explicit on a point that gets missed constantly. This is not a destroyer replacement. That matters because the Navy already had a next-generation destroyer. It was called DDG-X, about 14,500 tons, meant to replace the retiring 𝗙𝗃𝗆𝗿𝗀 cruisers and the oldest Burkes. According to the Congressional Research Service analysis delivered to Congress in January 2026, the Navy reportedly intends to suspend work on DDG-X as a consequence of starting the Battleship program. The money did not appear. It moved. A moderate ship the Navy wanted for years was set aside for a very large one, and that trade is the most consequential decision in the entire program. Now go stand on the forward deck of an Arleigh Burke destroyer because the heart of the new ship is already there under your feet, and it looks like almost nothing at all. A grid of flat steel hatches set into the deck. That is the Mark 41 vertical launching system. Each hatch is a sealed cell holding one canister. Inside that canister sits a missile that ignites and leaves straight up. What goes in the box is the whole question. An SM-6 air defense interceptor, a Tomahawk for land attack, an anti-submarine rocket, or an ESSM-𝗏, 4 short-range interceptors in the space of one. Count the hatches on a Burke and you get between 90 and 96. On a 𝗙𝗃𝗆𝗿𝗀 cruiser, 122. The new Battleship carries 128, plus 4 separate large diameter launchers for conventional prompt strike, the Navy's hypersonic weapon. The Congressional Budget Office notes that if that hypersonic system does not make it aboard, the Navy would install roughly 32 additional standard cells instead, which sounds like a modest gain over a cruiser until you understand what the number is actually solving. If the reason a Navy would spend $23 billion to add a few dozen missile cells seems like it should be a bigger story than it sounds, it is, and it is the kind of design logic this channel takes apart every week, so subscribing is the easy way to catch the next one. The problem has a name in the surface warfare community, and it is not a glamorous one. Magazine depth. Those cells are divided among competing jobs before anyone fires a shot. Air defense, land attack, anti-submarine. And a destroyer defending shipping lanes against sustained drone and missile attack expends interceptors at a rate no peacetime planning assumption accounted for. Run that for several nights and a serious share of the ship's combat power is simply gone. Here is the part that shapes everything. Those cells were not built to be reloaded at sea. Reloading has traditionally meant leaving the operating area entirely, crossing an ocean, and pulling alongside a pier with a crane and a calm harbor, weeks out of the fight. The Navy has been actively testing at-sea reload equipment in recent years for exactly this reason, because commanders in the Red Sea watched inventory drain faster than it could be replaced. That is the real vulnerability of a fleet built from many medium ships. Not that they are weak, that they run dry, and emptying them costs an enemy far less than refilling them costs you. And the arithmetic gets worse. The Navy is scheduled to begin decommissioning its oldest Arleigh Burke destroyers in 2030, starting with the USS Russell and the USS Fitzgerald. Total fleet magazine capacity shrinks at precisely the moment demand for it climbs. Stand on that Burke deck with that in mind, and the new Battleship stops looking like nostalgia. It looks like a very large ammunition locker with a reactor attached and 30 knots to move it. Now go inside the superstructure, into a darkened room full of screens, because the second half of the ship's job lives here and almost nobody talks about it. Every warship has a combat information center. On a destroyer, it is built to fight that destroyer, its own radar picture, its own targets, its own weapons. A flagship's command spaces are a different animal. They are built to hold the air picture, the surface picture, and the subsurface picture across hundreds of miles, and to direct other ships inside that picture. Look at the command spaces on a carrier or on a 𝗙𝗃𝗆𝗃𝗃 cruiser serving as air defense commander, and you are looking at the function. The new ship is expected to carry the ANSPI 6 Air and Missile Defense Radar, the same family going on to the newest Berks, and the ANSLQ 32 version 7 Electronic Warfare Suite, with a command architecture sized for fleet-level operations. That phrase does a lot of work, because the 𝗙𝗃𝗆𝗃𝗃 cruisers, the fleet's traditional air defense commanders, are retiring, with nothing purpose-built replacing them. The Navy's term for what this ship adds is capability at the high end of what it calls a high-low mix. The low end is many cheap hulls. The high end is a small number of ships that absorb the jobs the cheap hulls cannot, which sharpens the armor question rather than answering it. A ship that an entire formation depends on is a ship an enemy has every reason to hunt first. Keep moving aft, and the hull ends in something no battleship ever had: a flight deck with an enclosed hangar behind it. Go aboard any modern destroyer and you will find a version of this already. A landing spot, a hangar, and MH-60 Seahawk folded up inside it. The new ship's aviation spaces are sized for that Seahawk, for the 𝗚𝗵𝗶𝗽𝗀 𝗵𝗀𝗡 and the Bell 𝗚𝗵𝗶75 tilt rotor, and for future vertical lift aircraft, both crewed and uncrewed. That last category is the one to watch. A hangar this size on a ship this size is not for 2 utility helicopters. It is volume held open for aircraft that have not been built yet. The function is simple and it fixes an old problem. A missile is only as good as the targeting information behind it. Any ship's radar horizon is limited by the curvature of the Earth, roughly 20 to 30 miles against a surface contact, no matter how good the radar is. A hypersonic weapon reaching out hundreds of miles is worthless without something else finding the target. Aircraft off that deck push the ship's eyes past its own horizon. Surveillance, targeting, logistics, coordination. And the planning parameters describe the ship operating alone inside a carrier strike group or as the lead unit of a surface action group. That last case is the interesting one. This ship, a few escorts, and no carrier anywhere. Now find the crew and go back to the museum pier one more time, because this is where the two ships separate hardest. Walk the berthing spaces on a preserved Iowa. Rows of racks stacked 3 high in compartments that feel impossibly tight. That ship carried about 2,700 sailors in the Second World War and still around 1,800 after the 1980s modernization. The new battleship is projected at 650 to 850. For scale, an Arleigh Burke runs on 300 to 380. A 𝗙𝗃𝗆𝗃𝗃 on about 330. So the new ship carries roughly twice a destroyer's crew and less than half an Iowa's. The difference is standing right in front of you on that museum ship. 9 16-inch guns needed turret crews, powder handling parties, magazine crews, an entire human chain moving shells that weighed as much as a car. Go down into the powder magazine of a preserved battleship, and you are standing in a workplace that required dozens of people to do one thing. There is no equivalent on a missile ship. A vertical launch cell is loaded once, in port, and then it is a sealed box until it fires. That is also exactly why the last battleships died. In March 1992, the USS Missouri went out of service and the Navy stopped operating battleships entirely. Not because they failed. The Missouri and the Wisconsin had launched Tomahawks into Iraq the year before from armored box launchers bolted onto them during the 1980s reactivation. They died because every dollar spent crewing a battleship was a dollar not spent on a destroyer doing most of the same work with a fraction of the people. So when people say battleships are coming back, this is the honest version. The hull size came back. The manpower model did not and could not, which leaves one compartment, and it is the one that should worry program managers most. Somewhere in this design is a railgun. The weapons list in the Congressional Budget Office report is remarkable. Anti-air, land attack, and anti-ship missiles, hypersonic missiles, nuclear-armed cruise missiles, large laser weapons, and a railgun. On paper, the most heavily armed surface vessel the United States has ever built. The Office of Naval Research began serious work on the electromagnetic railgun in 2005, and the test footage from Dahlgren, Virginia is genuinely startling. Projectiles at 7 times the speed of sound, no propellant, no explosive charge, just current through parallel rails and a slug of metal leaving at a velocity nothing else on a ship can match. It worked. It set records. It also destroyed its own barrel almost every time it fired. The rails could not survive the heat and pressure. The guidance electronics could not reliably survive the electromagnetic pulse and the acceleration of being fired out of it. 15 years in, both problems were still unsolved. At the end of 2021, after roughly $500 million, the Navy shut it down, citing fiscal constraints, combat system integration challenges, and the prospective maturation of other weapon concepts. The money went to hypersonic missiles, directed energy, and electronic warfare. So the most expensive surface warship in American history includes, in its published weapons list, a system the same Navy abandoned 5 years ago. The Congressional Budget Office noted carefully that some of these systems may not be mature enough. That contradiction has not been resolved anywhere in the public record. It has simply been scheduled, and the Navy has already run this experiment once, on a ship you can see in the water today. Look at the USS 𝗙𝗂𝗏. Look specifically at the bow, where 2 enormous angular gun houses used to sit. The 𝗙𝗏 class was designed around those guns. 2 155mm advanced gun systems firing a rocket-boosted guided shell. The Navy planned 32 ships. The class was cut to 24, then 12, then 7, then 3, and as the numbers fell, the cost per round climbed past $800,000, approaching the price of a cruise missile that flew farther and hit harder. In 2016, the Navy canceled the ammunition. That left 3 ships at roughly $8 billion each, carrying the most advanced naval guns ever built, with nothing to load into them. The fix took nearly a decade. The guns were cut out entirely, the stealth housings opened up, and tubes for conventional prompt strike installed in their place. The USS 𝗙𝗏 went back to sea in January 2026 with no main gun at all. The lesson is narrower and harder than ambitious ships failing. A warship designed around an immature weapon becomes an extremely expensive hull waiting for a technology that may never arrive. Which brings the tour to the end and to the calendar. The contract for USS Defiant is planned for 2028, with delivery around 2036. 15 ships by 2056 would mean American yards delivering a battleship roughly every other year for nearly 3 decades. The Congressional Budget Office calculates that meeting the plan would require the total tonnage of large surface combatants to grow about 60%, and says directly that this could be a challenge for the shipbuilding industry. That industry is currently behind on submarines, behind on frigates, and behind on carriers. And the Congressional Budget Office was blunt about its own numbers. They remain highly uncertain. because the ship is early in design and much of the final configuration has not been decided. So what is inside the new $23 billion battleship? Everything you just walked through. The missile deck of a destroyer scaled up because the fleet learned it can run out of ammunition. The propulsion plant of a carrier because it cannot afford to leave station. The flight deck of a destroyer because its weapons outrange its own eyes. The command spaces of a cruiser that is being retired without a replacement. The hull dimensions of a battleship at a museum pier with every ounce of its armor left behind. And one weapon in the drawings that the Navy already gave up on once. Every single compartment is a sensible answer to a real problem. What nobody has answered yet is whether they all belong in the same ship.